Introducing Rabbi Joel Zeff at 10:02 on a Wednesday morning as we zip along with Zoom with Efrat Kollel on Rabbi Zeff's Part 9 Shir on Messianism and the Mashiach.
Hi, everybody. We are now going to finish up the discussion of the Rambam's approach towards the different issues within eschatology, the whole concept of the end of days. So we already have discussed that the Rambam's conception of the Messianic era is an extremely naturalistic conception. He explicitly says that none of the laws of nature will change in the Messianic era. It will be a time of great affluence, of abundance, of health, etc. A time when we can devote ourselves, because it'll be a time of such prosperity, we can devote ourselves to piety, to the study of Torah, to the study of wisdom, which is the ultimate way in which we then achieve the ultimate reward, which we'll discuss what it is in a second. Okay, so that's the Messianic era. Now, what is the ultimate reward? The ultimate reward is not the things that the Torah seems to promise as the reward. The Torah, according to the Rambam, when it says, if you do what God wants us to do, that you'll have fertility and wealth, etc., that in fact, that's not the ultimate reward. The ultimate reward is Olam HaBa, the world to come. What is the world to come according to the Rambam? That is the nature of existence after death. What does that mean? That the body and soul at death separate, and the existence of the disembodied soul, that is the world to come. And as he points out, the world to come is not to come, in the sense that it, as an existence which doesn't exist now, but will exist after this world, it exists right now. There are souls in the world to come as we speak. As a matter of fact, if you take a look at worldtocome.com, there's a TV camera up there in the world to come, and you can get live streaming footage from existence in the world to come. What is that, Bruce?
This is a book by T. Lobsang Rampa called The Third Eye. It's essentially about the lamas in Tibet and how they do transmigration of the souls. Not routinely, not at all, but in the West, we don't like it. But in their part of the world, it's common knowledge that people do it.
Okay, so let's put that aside for now. And now
we believe in transmigration of souls. Is that what you're alluding to?
No, I mean, you'll see in a second. I'm not talking about transmigration of souls. We will discuss that, but not right now. So I was obviously being facetious about the closed circuit camera in the world to come. According to the Rambam, the world, I just was trying to make the point facetiously that the world to come exists right now. What is it? It's the disembodied soul, which for the righteous. Now remember, righteous according to the Rambam doesn't mean that you never did anything wrong. Righteous means that when we do the calculation, you're 51% the good guy and 49% the bad guy, minimally, right? Don't ask me how these calculations are made, only Hashem knows. And if you're found to be a tzaddik, right, you merit the world to come. So then you're in some type of ecstatic state of communion, of dveikut with God. One has some kind of intellectual appreciation of divine truth, and that's some kind of ecstatic state that we can't even imagine. So that's the world to come. That's the ultimate reward. What's the ultimate punishment? The ultimate punishment is that people who don't score so high on their mitzvah quotient, so they are deprived of the world to come, meaning when they die, they die the same death as a mosquito. They're completely obliterated, wiped out. So that's the ultimate punishment, the real punishment of those that are evil. Now, what about the fact that Torah makes certain promises if we do what God wants us to do as defined by the Torah? The Ram says that those are intermediary, you could perhaps even say educational steps, in which God says, if you do what I want you to do, if you have the right values, I'll make it easier for you to achieve the real reward, which is the world to come. That is, I'll give you health, wealth, etc. When you have those things, it's easier to do the things which are necessary so that your disembodied soul after death will experience the world to come. On the other hand, for somebody who doesn't seem to show an interest in doing what the Torah says, in pursuing truth and wisdom, etc., so God says, you're not interested, I'll make it harder for you to achieve the world to come. So the Rambam seems to view the worldly rewards and punishments more as an educational approach towards encouraging people to pursue the right values, ultimately to encourage them to pursue the right values, since they see that if you do that, then good things happen and God helps you, and if not, not. Okay, fine. So that's the Rambam's conception of the world to come. It's the state of existence after biological death. Now, we then segued, this was all from the Rambam's Hilchot Tshuva, the laws of repentance. We then pointed out that the Rambam also discusses these issues in his Judeo-Arabic commentary on the Mishnah, particularly that passage which explains the chapter in Mishnah, in Tractate Sanhedrin, which begins with a Mishnah that says all Israel have a portion in the world to come. So the Rambam, in his commentary in the Mishnah, written in Judeo-Arabic, as I said before, takes this opportunity to discuss all of these different notions of the world to come, of the Garden of Eden, of Gehenna, hell, which is not the best translation of that word, but Gehenna, notion of resurrection of the dead. So the Rambam takes the opportunity to discuss those things. That's what we started last week. Now, we're only seeing parts of it because we already know what the Rambam thinks about the world to come. The world to come is the state of the soul after death. It's the reward for the righteous, and the ultimate punishment for the wicked is they're deprived of that state of existence. Now, what about the Garden of Eden? So as we saw last week, towards the end, the Garden of Eden is, according to Rambam, a place on this planet. It's a physical location. And it just happens to be really beautiful. And it happens to have very succulent fruit and perfect weather, and is as perfect as this world, material world, can offer somebody to live there. Okay, it's something like San Diego for people who know what San Diego is like. Okay.
But what you're saying, the world to come is also sort of a place. It's just a place for souls.
No, it's not a place. It's not a physical place.
No, I meant a soul place. I mean,
it's a state of existence, but it's not a place. Whereas the Garden of Eden, according to Rambam, is a physical location on this planet. It's right now someplace. And the assumption that Rambam makes, he doesn't go into detail, is that we don't know where it is anymore, but it's someplace on this planet. Keep looking. It's even better than San Diego. We just don't know where it is. Okay, so that's the Garden of Eden. You'll see a theme here. The Rambam, when he can, naturalizes things, right? So that the Messianic era is completely natural, no laws of nature change. The Garden of Eden, natural. It's just a place on this planet which is a nice place to live. Okay? Totally removes all the supernatural sort of theological significance from that notion. What is Gehinnom, according to the Rambam? The Gehinnom says that that's an expression which is used to describe, this is a review of last week, it's used to describe punishment for the wicked. Now, what does that mean? So the Rambam doesn't explain exactly what that means. The Ramban, Nachmanides, interprets the Rambam to mean that it's a description of the nature of the death that the soul will experience of the wicked. The souls of the wicked will experience. So let me just backtrack in the review, that the Ramban is troubled by the fact that according to the Rambam's conception of the world to come, which is the ultimate reward, so what happens to the wicked? The wicked live in this world, and then they cease to exist. Totally. No souls, no bodies, nothing. They die. Right? And the soul is blotted out. So the Ramban says, that's not fair. Because in what way is that a punishment? The fact that they're deprived of an existence in the world to come doesn't sound like much of a punishment because they'll never know the difference. Right? It's not as if they're watching it from afar. They're down in hell, burning up, and they look up and they see all the people in heaven that are having a great existence, and they feel really bad about it. Right? According to the Rambam, that's not what happens. According to the Rambam, they just cease to exist, like a mosquito ceases to exist. Where's the justice? So the Ramban suggests that maybe what the Rambam meant when he defined Gehenna is that it's a description of the process of death. When they die, it won't be just gliding off into the sunset gently. That they will experience in ways that maybe the observer wouldn't necessarily notice, but it's going to be a terribly excruciating death. That the process of biological death, experienced on a kind of a soul level, will be a way in which punishes them. And at the end result of that very horrible process that is Gehenna will be that they cease to exist. So the punishment is in the way that they will die. Again, not necessarily noticeable by the observer, right? They may die in their sleep. So from us, it seems like it was very peaceful. But from the soul perspective, it was really horrible. Okay, so that's Gehenna. Now we're going to move on in the Rambam. And so those of you, right, you should have the source sheets where it says Olam HaBa, part 2.
By the way,
Is
this everyone? This is just for the Jews?
No, everybody.
Everyone on earth. Every human has this
every
process.
Human. Right. Okay, now, resurrection of the dead. This is a fascinating chapter in terms of the Rambam's relationship to it and how he was understood or misunderstood. I want to back up for a second before we read the passage from his Judeo-Arabic introduction to the chapter in the Mishnah, which discusses these eschatological issues. And I want to remind you of something we saw way back. You might remember that we discussed if Bruce came out of the closet and said, I'm the Messiah, is there a way to prove that he's the Messiah or not? And if you remember, the Rambam had said very explicitly that you should not use as a litmus test to verify a messianic claim any kind of supernatural activity. So let's say Bruce says, I've been modest up till now, but I am the Messiah. We can't say, okay, walk on water or resurrect the dead. No. And his proof is from Bar Kokhba. And I don't want to rehearse or rehash that whole episode. We spent a lot of time on that. Because the Rambam has this idea the Messianic era is completely natural.
I want to
just
be
like
clear as a Kohen, I'm ruled out of this.
Okay, so if Kenny Kodesh were to come out of the closet and finally admit that he's the Messiah, right? So since the Messianic era is going to be totally natural, so too the Messianic personality is going to be totally natural. You're a human being. And someone who lives and functions within the limitations of natural law. So you can't ask him to perform a miracle. And he explicitly says, and you can't ask him to resurrect the dead. He explicitly says that. So the readers of that passage, including the famous critic of the Rambam, the Ravid, Rabbi Avram ben David, who was an older contemporary of the Rambam, who wrote these critical notes in the Mishneh Torah of the Rambam, says, I swear, the Ravid says, that this rabbi seems to be denying the notion of resurrection of the dead. And you could understand why someone would think that, because the Rambam just said, don't expect the Messiah to resurrect the dead. Now, that's the impression you could get from the Rambam. Now, particularly since the Rambam has such naturalistic conception of the Messianic period, I can really appreciate why people would have been suspicious. He doesn't really believe in the resurrection of the dead because it's supposed to be totally natural. Resurrection of the dead is not natural. Can we all agree upon that? It's not part of the way nature works. So the Rambam addresses this issue in his Judeo-Arabic commentary on the Mishnah. Let's read what he says. He says, the resurrection of the dead is one of the cardinal doctrines of the law of Moses. Well, I'll be a monkey's uncle. So contrary to what the Rambam was accused of, he actually explicitly says that the resurrection of the dead is a core belief of Judaism. Not only that, I read on. He who does not believe in this has no religion. Wow. okay, and no bond with the Jewish faith. That's a little scary. Someone who does not believe in the resurrection of the dead has severed his bond with authentic Jewish theology. But it is the reward of the righteous only. Okay, only the righteous will be resurrected. And know that man is bound to die and become dissolved into his component parts. Okay, now let's understand better what the Rambam was talking about. We're going to supplant this passage in his Judeo-Arabic commentary in the Mishnah with a whole essay that he wrote to the Jews of Yemen on the doctrine of resurrection of the dead. And that's at the bottom of the page in the Hebrew translation and in English. Let's read the translation here in English. He says the following. It's a whole essay. I'm just
where are you?
Yeah, source number 2 on the that says Olam HaBa, part 2. And it says Rambam, letter on resurrection of the dead. Rambam says, we've already mentioned in the commentary in the Mishnah that those people whose souls will return to those bodies will eat and drink and procreate, and they will die after a very long life, as is the life of the Messianic era. But the life which is not followed by death is the life of the world to come, since there's no bodily existence. So let's just unpack what the Rambam just said. So Rambam is saying the following, that there is going to be the resurrection of the dead. What's going to happen? So just to make things a little simpler, because the Rambam is not exactly sure when it's going to happen, but just to make things simpler, let's assume that it happens somewhere within the Messianic era. Now remember, the Messianic era is completely natural. I want to just unpack that for a second. What does it mean it's completely natural? You know that the existence that we live in now, the historical existence now, is completely natural. But when the Exodus from Egypt took place, that was in the realm of the completely natural, except for the Red Sea split. When the Rambam asserts that there'll be a natural framework, what he means is the following, that the default functioning of the world will be in accordance with the laws of nature. That doesn't mean that God can't interfere from time to time to deviate from the normal functioning of the laws of nature. That's called a miracle. The Rambam believes in miracles. But fundamentally, the world is operating according to natural law. It's just that from time to time, God interferes and creates a miracle. So the splitting of the Red Sea was a miracle which took place within the context of a natural framework, where everything else operates according to the laws of nature. The Messianic era, according to the Rambam, is going to be completely natural, but there will be a miraculous event. What's that miraculous event? The resurrection of the dead. The dead are going to come alive again. Now, the Rambam said explicitly, only the righteous will be resurrected during the resurrection of the dead. I want to point out, just try to imagine this according to the Rambam. Where is everybody else who has died before the Messianic era? Okay, so according to the Rambam, they're either in the world to come, that's the righteous, or if they're wicked, they're nowhere because they've ceased to exist. Okay. Now, what is the resurrection of the dead? The resurrection of the dead is that the souls that are in Olam HaBa, the world to come, which have this disembodied state of existence, are going to appear. The Rambam doesn't describe exactly the mechanism, but there'll be a knock on the door, and Aunt Sylvia, who died 10 years ago, is going to walk in the house. Okay, now.
She's going to want the house. Think about the problem. I mean,
that's good.
So the idea that there'll be billions and billions and trillions of people on the planet that doesn't disturb the Rambam, the physical logistics of this?
There's room enough for everybody. So it's an interesting question. He doesn't deal with it. Now, I want to try to understand what then is going to happen according to the Rambam, and also what's the function of resurrection of the dead, as well. What forces the Rambam to buy into a notion which he tries to avoid, and that is the supernatural. Let's deal with the last question first. The Rambam, in his letter on resurrection of the dead, says that though he generally tries to understand things very naturally, that's why, as we saw, all of the prophecies which describe the Messianic era, which seem to be supernatural, like ferocious animals coexisting with docile animals instead of one devouring the other. So the Rambam interprets those passages metaphorically, that the ferocious animals are the enemies of the Jewish people. The docile animals are, in fact, that's us, Israel, right? But when the Messiah comes, that the bad guys will be wiped out or they'll coexist with us, etc., after they learn their lesson. So it's all metaphorical. Well, why not interpret the passages in the Tanach, which seem to describe resurrection of the dead? Why not interpret those as metaphorical as well? So Rambam says he normally would try to do that. As a matter of fact, the most famous passage in the prophetic writings, which could be interpreted as a reference to the resurrection of the dead, is the famous vision in Ezekiel of the dry bones, right? The dry bones coming to life. So the Rambam says that's not even a description of resurrection of the dead. That's a metaphorical description of the renaissance of the Jewish people. That the Jewish people in exile are like the dry bones, but in the Messianic era, we're going to come alive as a vibrant Jewish people in our own land, under our own sovereignty. That's the image in Ezekiel, according to the Rambam. But he says, if you look at the very end of the book of Daniel, the prophet Daniel, that's where, according to the Rambam, the passages which describe the resurrection of the dead are so explicit, and the context is so clear, the passage doesn't lend itself in any way to be interpreted as referring to the renaissance of the Jewish people or any other kind of metaphorical explanation. It seems to be a very clear and compelling description of resurrection of the dead. Okay. I want to point out that the Rambam had a very creative imagination, and I mentioned this last week. Even something as obvious as the fact that God created the world, the Rambam says theoretically he could have reinterpreted those passages to be metaphorical if for some reason he didn't believe in creation. So I find it hard to believe that the Rambam, using his imagination, couldn't somehow interpret the passages in the book of Daniel as a reference to something else rather than to the miracle of resurrection of the dead. Now, the Rambam doesn't say this, but this is my own thought, and it may be completely baseless. And that is the following. The Rambam was a traditional Jew. He davened 3 times a day. And when he davened 3 times a day, so he said the Shemona Esrei, the Amidah prayer, and the second paragraph of that prayer focuses on the resurrection of the dead. So the Rambam is sort of stuck here because he has this passage in Daniel, which it is true, it's harder to interpret that passage allegorically. But he also has the overwhelming focus of Jewish tradition that explicitly asserts the truth of resurrection of the dead, and he asserts that 3 times a day himself when he davens the Shemona Esrei. So I can appreciate why the Rambam, at least in this particular instance, would have felt reluctant to allegorize the references in the book of Daniel, because he realizes that the sages apparently thought that that was a central aspect of theology. I'll discuss in a second what would be the meaning of resurrection of the dead theologically according to the Rambam. Yes, Bruce.
I'm just wondering if resurrection, if the Rambam anyways could have alluded to, the souls go somewhere, and it's not Olam HaBa yet. And resurrection of the dead would refer to that process by those souls going to the world of souls. That's the resurrection of those souls. The other souls We don't know. They either disappear or go to a bad place, but the resurrection is a soulful comment, not a,
Yeah.
because the physical one seems really hard to be. I mean, it seems unbelievable, but the
Yeah.
soulful one seems possible.
Okay. The problem is that the passages in the book of Daniel seem to be very clear at describing a physical resurrection. And the point I made before, when we discuss resurrection in the Shemona Esrei, also there, it's pretty straightforward. We're talking about physical resurrection. Okay, fine. Now, I want to try to understand. So, in a certain sense, the Rambam is, and I apologize to the Rambam for this, forced into this notion of resurrection. But how does he conceive of it? How does it fit into his theology? So, number one, we just saw that the Rambam explicitly said that people are going to die after they're resurrected. I don't know. I hope you noticed that, right? So we'll look at it again. Maybe I read it too fast. He says that those people whose souls will return to those bodies will eat and drink and procreate. You realize that his notion of resurrection of the dead is that you rejoin humanity during the Messianic era, and you behave as the rest of humanity. You eat, drink, and procreate, and spend most of your time learning Torah in the Efrat Kollel, right? And he then says, and they will die after a very long time, as is the life of the Messianic era. Just like everybody else during the Messianic era is going to die. It's a natural existence. Everybody will die. Even those alive during the Messianic era, whether you're alive because you happen to be still alive when it starts, or because you were resurrected from the dead, you will die. Now, why is it that you'll die? Because we know how the Rambam defines the world to come. The world to come is the disembodied state of the soul after death. That's the real reward. So the Messianic era is not the real reward. It's only preparatory. And the function of the world to come, of the Messianic era, is that you can better prepare yourself for the world to come by having an easy existence, so you can devote time to learning in the Efrat Kollel, and therefore perfect your soul, so that therefore benefits from this thing called the world to come after death. So everybody's going to die, including the people who were resurrected. They will die too. This is an amazing interpretation of the world to come. I just want to point out, somewhat facetiously, that one could argue, and I think persuasively, as we spent a lot of time on, the Rambam did not believe in the second coming of the Messiah. Right? According to the Rambam, there's no second chance, right? You either fulfill the Messianic agenda in your lifetime and you're the Messiah, or you die before you fulfill it and you're not the Messiah. You don't get a second chance, right? As opposed to the Barbanel, who thought there was such an idea of a second chance. Okay. So now I want to point that out facetiously.
But even he will be resurrected.
I'm sorry?
Even this Mashiach will die and get resurrected, and
That's
maybe
true.
will be Mashiach again. It's like, in theory.
So
doesn't he say he's killed and he's not Mashiach? Not that he dies.
Yeah. So I don't want to go back to that issue. The only reason the Rambam says killing is because that happened to be the case of Bar Kokhba, which is his paradigm. But the Rambam clearly says if you don't fulfill it for whatever reason. Okay.
And he's also not insinuating here that that the resurrection, so to speak, is not dependent on Mashiach coming.
So it's pretty clear, even though he seems to be not 100% convinced. He just doesn't know exactly how it fits in. But the easiest way to understand him is, let's just put it inside the Messianic era. But let me make my point now. I'm about to tell a joke. So the Rambam doesn't believe in the second coming, but he definitely believes in the second going. Right? Everybody appreciates that joke, right?
Yes.
It's not a joke, it's true. According to Rambam, there's a second going, right? Not a second coming, because if you're resurrected during the Messianic era, the righteous are resurrected. If you're resurrected, so you've already gone once, you died once. So now you die again, right? Why? It's not a punishment. On the contrary, it's because the whole idea of the Messianic era is to prepare for the world to come, which is the ultimate reward. So you have to die in order for the soul to be liberated from the body to then get the ultimate reward of the world to come.
Is the Rambam particularly unique in this, and there's a multiplicity of views, or is the Rambam sort of like a consensus?
No, the Rambam is not consensus. Totally not. And we'll discuss, I don't know if it'll be today, but I think it'll be today. We'll discuss the other approach. Now, I also pointed out last week, I find it just absolutely amazing that, I've seen presentations of this is Jewish thinking on resurrection of the dead, which only present the Kabbalistic view and don't even mention the Rambam as if somehow like that's it. It's not true. There happens to be this whole spectrum of views, and the Rambam is the most extreme rationalist approach. Okay, now I want to just suggest what the purpose of resurrection is. How do we fit it into Rambam's theology? Truth of the matter is, it's perfect. Why? So even though he kind of had to have his arm twisted to believe in it, but he ends up putting it as the 13th article of faith in his 13 articles of faith. And as we saw here, he says, you're not a member of the Jewish religion. If you remember the tribe, you haven't really bought into Jewish theology, right? If you don't ascribe to the resurrection of the dead. Yeah, but what sense does it make? So it makes a lot of sense. Why? Because according to the Rambam, who says the ultimate reward is after you die, where the soul is in the state of existence called Olam HaBa, the world to come, and it has this ecstatic communion with God. The quality of your world to come is a function of how well prepared you are, as a function of what you did in this world, your piety and wisdom. So resurrection of the dead, according to the Rambam's view, seems to be a function of God's grace. God says, look, you lived here on this planet for 120 years, in the 20th century, say. And now your soul is in the world to come. Great for you. But you know what? You've got a 3-star world to come. 3 stars. But there's 4 stars, there's 5 stars, maybe there's 10 stars, right? It's all a function of how well prepared you are. So therefore, the Rambam says, God says, I'm going to give you a chance to upgrade your existence in the world to come. How does that work?
Or downgrade.
The souls in the world to come. I hope that's not true. The souls in the world to come. I suppose it's theoretically possible, but I don't think the Rambam has it in mind. The soul will come down into this physical world again, physically. That's resurrection of the dead. And will spend all of its time, men and women. The Efrat Kollel become co-ed. Matter of fact, half the rabbis will be women. I don't know about that. That's a joke. Boy, I'm not sure we're going to post this one on the internet. So, and during that time,
people lost their Olam HaBa for jokes like that. So
that's absolutely probably true. So they will then get this chance to upgrade their existence in the world to come by being able to live in a world in which it's going to be easy to be a good Jew. You won't have to work very hard. Everybody's going to be healthy. You'll live for a long time and have all of this free time to spend in the Efrat Kollel, right? And therefore, when you die again, second going, right, you'll have an upgraded eternal existence of the disembodied soul in the world to come. That seems to be the Rambam's understanding of the doctrine of of resurrection in the world to come. Okay, any questions or comments on that? Matter of fact, just before I open up for questions and comments, I just want to read one last paragraph that we didn't read yet, going back to his introduction to Perek Halak, his Judeo-Arabic commentary in the Mishnah. The last paragraph we didn't read together. He says the following: but the Messiah will die, and his son's son will reign in his stead. Rabbi says explicitly, the Mashiach is going to die because it's completely naturalistic, the Messianic era. And the Messiah is a human being. He's going to die. And he has to die. Why? Because the reward is not in this world. The reward is the disembodied state of the soul. So it would be a terrible cruelty from the wrong perspective if the Messiah would live forever in the Messianic era, because it would be confined to a material, this worldly existence, which according to Rambam is kind of a bummer. The soul's ability to be able to comprehend God is confined and constricted by the body, by material existence. So the Messiah is going to die, and he'll have a son. In the Messianic era, it could last for a long time. And his son will be the next king, right? Mashiach is just the leader of the Jewish people, righteous leader of the Jewish people. He'll have a son. That son will be a good guy too, reign, and he'll die. And then his son will also reign. Rambam says explicitly, it can go on for many generations. His kingdom will endure a very long time, the Davidic dynasty. And the lives of men and women will be long also, because longevity is a consequence of the removal of sorrows and cares. It's going to be a carefree existence. So you'll live a long time, no stress. Let not the fact of the duration of his kingdom for thousands of years, the Messianic era could be thousands of years, seem strange to you. For the sages have said that when a number of good things come together, it's not an easy thing for them to separate again. Don't worry about that last sentence there. But the point is, Messianic era could be very long, and its function is to be able to have a state of existence which facilitates the perfection of the soul, the further perfection of the soul, whether you're alive then or resurrected then, which will then allow you to achieve the real reward of the world to come. Okay, let's just pause. Any question on the Rambam's approach before we dive into the Kabbalistic approach? We will start the Kabbalistic approach today.
I've asked you before if people learning put their own viewpoint in the text and therefore read what they want, or they're learning from the text out and it speaks to them. And from what you've said, it sounds like the Rambam normally wouldn't hold this position, but is forced to do so by the text. Is that correct?
Yeah. Now, it happens, I believe that to be true, and again, I hope I don't lose my place in the world to come for saying that. But I would say that even though I think his arm is twisted a little bit to buy into this notion, remember, his contemporaries thought he really didn't believe in it. So this is not a crazy thing to say that, well, he did, but maybe he was forced a little bit.
Do you know why they said that?
But okay, hang on a second. But it happens to fit. Once the Rambam says, you know what, I say 3 times a day that God resurrects the dead, the passages in Daniel are very hard to interpret allegorically. What the heck? Okay, it's true. But once he reaches that stage, it works very well for him because it fits this notion of Olam HaBa being the ultimate reward. And the quality of that Olam HaBa, the world to come, is a function of how much you perfect yourself in this world. So it works out very well that God, in his loving kindness, gives us a chance to upgrade in more fortuitous circumstances. Okay, now, I also want to point out.
So why did you say that you thought it was really Bediavad, that really they twisted his arm? And why say that? What leads you to that idea?
Because the Rambam, in general, minimizes miracles. So why is the Rambam deviating from his normal modus operandi of minimizing miracles? So that's why I'm suggesting. But you're making a good point. Maybe I should be more generous and not make this so kind of reluctant on the part of the Rambam. It's a very good point. Okay, I probably would be more orthodox if I took your position on that. Okay, I just want to point out in that this notion, Bruce, that you raised about coming to a text with preconceived notions, we do, right? We all do. But I will say, and it's sort of a good segue to what we're about to do right now, in all candor, as much as part of me really likes the Rambam's rationalist approach, Ramban, Nachmanides, seems to be much less influenced by preconceived notions. He takes Jewish tradition and our traditional text much more at face value. Okay, I think I've mentioned a bunch of times there's a fascinating contrast between the Rambam and the Ramban on the concept of astrology. Whereas the Rambam has a whole letter on it, and he argues philosophically. The very last paragraph, he deals with the passages in the Talmud that seem to support astrology. The Ramban also has a letter on astrology, and he says, you want to know if astrology is true? Let's look at Masechet Shabbat. Let's look in this Midrash, right? For him, you don't need a microscope or a telescope, just whatever our tradition says. So he does seem to be more Ramban, Nachmanides, more faithful to the plain meaning of Jewish tradition. Okay, any questions or comments on the approach of Rambam? Okay. Everybody take a deep breath. We're going to change gears now pretty radically. It happens to be, and it's not surprising, that there are many nuances of differences among those who oppose the Rambam's approach. There's Ramban. There's Rav Saadia Gaon. There's Rabbi Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, the Ramchal. There's the Maharal. And on and on and on. And I don't want to spend the next 3 months discussing this. So what I'd like to do is take perhaps the most representative of the anti-Rambam school in respect to this issue, which is Ramban, Nachmanides. They also happen to just, Ramban is the next generation. He has a lot of respect for the Rambam, and he explicitly discusses the Rambam. He wrote a book, Ramban, Nachmanides, called called Torah Ta'adam. The very last part of Torah Ta'adam is called Shar Gmul, which is translated the gate of recompense. Gmul means to be paid back. 1 second, please. Yes?
Raya opened the thing that we need to put in food inside.
Oy, okay, tell your Rabbanim, okay?
She did it with her mouth.
Oy vey. Okay, so right now I'm giving a shiur, so I can't talk right now. So this is Bein Hazmanim. We've got grandchildren around. So that was a grandchild reporting that our dog had just got into their stuff and the joys of existence in this world.
Rabbi, by listening to all these people, are you implying that there's no Masorah and each great rabbi just figures it out on their own?
Yeah.
There's no Kabbalah here.
There's no definitive Masorah. That the Rambam actually says this explicitly in his Mishneh Torah, that even the Rambam's perspective, he can describe things in general contours, but specifics, there's no definitive tradition on these matters. Now, even if you're more of a fundamentalist, a literalist like Ramban, Nachmanides, the sources are so complex and so confusing. And you have the Tanach sources, you have the Talmudic, Midrashic sources, you have, for at least the Kabbalistic sources. Try to make sense out of all that material and create a coherent picture. Good luck. But that's what people are struggling to do. So the Ramban writes this work, Shar HaGmul, which is part of this work, Torah Ta'adam, in which he deals with all these issues of eschatology. Much of it is devoted to relating to the Rambam, because the Ramban, even though he's a Kabbalist, he has tremendous respect for the Rambam. So even when he disagrees, and he has strong disagreements with the Rambam, it's with a lot of respect and a lot of subtlety and a lot of quoting of sources. So to go through all of Shar Gmul would be an amazing thing to do, but we're not going to do it in the framework of this particular discussion. But luckily, this whole long analysis of the Ramban, he concludes with a summation. He writes himself a summation of his views. So we're now at source number 3, and let's hear how the Ramban himself describes his views. We have now explained our intent regarding the reward for observing the commandments and the punishment for their transgression. Let us restate it briefly. So here is, in the Ramban's own words, the brief version of eschatology. The reward of the souls and their existence in the world of souls is called Gan Eden, the Garden of Eden, by our rabbis. Occasionally, they call it the upper chamber, or the academy on high, Yeshiva Domala. So let's talk about what he means by that. He's saying the following. According to, let's actually read the whole thing, and then we'll describe it. After the world of souls, or Gan Eden, will come the era of the Messiah, which is part of this world. At the conclusion thereof, the great judgment and the resurrection of the dead will occur. This is the recompense that includes the body and the soul. This is the great principle that is the hope of all who look longingly to the Holy and Blessed be He. It is the world to come, in which the body will become like the soul, and the soul will be cleaving to the knowledge of the Most High, just as it adhered to that knowledge in the Garden of Eden in the world of souls. Now, however, it will be elevated to an even greater degree of perception than heretofore, and the existence of all be forever and ever. Now, that's a lot in a few words. Let's try to unpack what he just said. Let's back up one step. We already saw that the Messianic era, according to Ramban, is supernatural. Now, it's part of this world in the sense that it's material, but it doesn't operate within the laws of nature as we have previously understood them. Where did we see this? We saw it when the Ramban tried to describe what the Torah means when the Torah says that the ferocious animal is removed from the world. And the Ramban explained what's going to happen. The nature of animals is going to be changed, transformed. And it's a description of the Messianic era. Okay? So says the Ramban. So the Messianic era will be a material existence, but not operating within the laws of nature as we previously understood them. Fine. Now, what happens when a person dies, according to Ramban? When a person dies, so their soul doesn't go to Olam HaBa, like the Rambam said. Right? According to Rambam, that's the reward. The soul is separated from the body, and it has this ecstatic state of existence with God. According to the Ramban, that's not exactly what happens. There's a kind of halfway destination. And he says it's referred to by the sages as the Garden of Eden. What is that? Well, the righteous go to the state of existence, which sounds a little bit like the Rambam. They have this sort of semi-ecstatic, I'll call it semi-ecstatic existence where they appreciate God. It's disembodied, right? The body and soul separated, they died. But it's not permanent. It's not permanent. What happens to the evil people during that time? They undergo excruciating punishment. That's Gehenna. After death, the souls of the non-righteous are punished. Right? Brimstone, fire, sulfur, whatever it is. Okay? There's going to be a punishment. Whereas the righteous will be underneath the throne of glory of God. Okay, fine. That's the Garden of Eden. But what happens then? So, a lot of people have died through world history. So those souls are in this kind of intermediary state, like I described before. The righteous, experiencing God disembodied. The evil, being tortured. Okay, disembodied. Now you have the Messianic era, which comes in. The Messianic era is a supernatural transformation of this world. The laws of nature as we understand them don't exist anymore, but it's material. It's just been transformed. Then what happens is there's a resurrection of the dead. Resurrection of the dead. What is that? Now here's where it's very different than the Rambam. At that point, the souls of the righteous say adios to Hashem, and they come back into bodies, except for those bodies, as the Ramban explained, where he says, in which it is the world to come, in which the body will become like the soul, and the soul be cleaving the knowledge of the Most High. That the world to come, according to Nachmanides, Ramban, is not like the Rambam. The Rambam said it's a disembodied state of existence. According to Ramban, the world to come is part of the Messianic era. It's the stage in the Messianic era in which the righteous who have passed away come into this world and bodies, except those bodies will be perfect bodies. Usually, the body can be viewed as a kind of obstruction and hindrance to our ability to serve Hashem. You get distracted by the body, the Yetzer Hara, etc., evil impulse. But in the world to come, which is a stage in the Messianic era, which occurs after resurrection of the dead, which will be a privilege granted to the righteous, that the soul enters a body, but it's a perfected state of existence. And there's no second going, like the Rambam said. That lasts forever. We're going to be a body and a soul together, but it's going to be a perfected body. You ever seen Kenny Kodish's body? It's going to look something like that. There we go, demonstration. Right? It's going to be a perfected body in which the body doesn't represent a challenge or a distraction from the soul. Like the Ramban says, the body will become soulish. I'm making up a word. It becomes like the soul. It doesn't mean it becomes not physical. It'll be physical, but it's going to be perfected. And that's a state of existence which will exist forever. And it will be a greater state of existence, he says, than the Garden of Eden. The Garden of Eden was immediately after death, when there was a certain perception of God in a disembodied state of existence. But when the soul comes back into this perfected body like Kenny Kodish's, there will be, as he says explicitly, an even greater degree of perception that somehow the soul in the body, this perfected body, is going to be an even greater ecstatic existence of appreciation of God. And that could be achieved in the Garden of Eden, which was a disembodied state of existence. And that lasts forever. It's Olam HaBa. Okay. Now, I want to say something a little philosophical for a second. And then open up for any questions that we might have time for. Oh, wait a second. Are we going till 11:15?
11.
11. Okay, fine. So, for me, personally, I'm agnostic in these matters. You know, is the Rambam right? Is the Ramban right on these matters? I'm not agnostic when it comes to God. Okay. I am an Orthodox Jew, contrary to what it may appear sometimes. Okay. What strikes me as fascinating when you contrast we'll use English terms, the Maimonidean approach with the Kabbalistic approach of Nachmanides, Ramban, is that the Rambam's approach, even though it's very rationalistic to the extent that you can be rational about these ideas, in a certain sense, it seems to me, it's a profound devaluation of creation. If the ultimate goal is a disembodied soul, which exists in the static state of appreciation of God, it seems that there's a kind of rejection on some ultimate level of the value of this worldly natural existence. Whereas according to the Kabbalists, Ramban, where he says the world to come is this world, but it's a perfected, spiritualized this world. It's really this world, this material. It's a stage in the Messianic era. But there's going to be a profound transformation. Things are going to be very different. But you're going to exist in a body. But this is going to be a perfected body with a perfected soul. And that will last forever. So ironically, people sometimes view Jewish mysticism as otherworldly. But ironically, the mystical approach is in fact the affirmation of the value of material existence, because it is the Kabbalistic approach which says that the ultimate reward is the body and the soul together existing in this world, which is then the world to come because it's been perfected and spiritualized, but still material. I mean, obviously we can't, what do these terms mean? We can't explain it. What does it mean to have a material world that's been spiritualized? What does it mean that the body is like the soul? I don't know. But at least on a conceptual level, the notion that the ultimate reward is the body and the soul together on this planet, which has then been perfected, is an incredibly profound affirmation of the value of God's creation and of creation of a human being, which is a body and soul together. Whereas according to the Rambam, Maimonides, it seems to be problematic that the ultimate reward is a kind of rejection of the value of this worldly existence. I just thought that that was a really interesting comment that emerges from these two schools of thought, which is a little surprising. Like I said, people tend to view mysticism as some kind of like otherworldly state of being. Now we have about 40 seconds. So if anybody has a question which we can ask and answer in 40 seconds, I'd be happy to address it. Or you can send me an email, or we can address it next week as we go on with the last component of our discussion, which will be reincarnation. That's not resurrection. Reincarnation is you're born again. Not that the body put into a soul is put into a body again. That's resurrection, right? This is you're born again. You're a fetus again, right? So that we'll discuss next week, Bezrat Hashem. Any 10 seconds left.
Is the Ramban more rooted in sources? So again, it's sort of a Masorah as opposed to a Svara?
Well, okay, it's hard to quantify it, but like I said before, the Ramban definitely, his whole argument with the Rambam is look at this source and look at this source and look at this source and look at this source. In Shar Gamul, he's quoting sources right and left. He doesn't argue from necessarily philosophical or logical. He says, look at the text of Jewish tradition, and let's see if we can create a coherent picture based upon these texts of Jewish tradition. And that's what his picture of it is based upon the texts. So relative to the Rambam, I would say, in fairness, it's much more rooted in Jewish tradition as opposed to the Rambam, which is, relatively speaking, more influenced by his sort of philosophical understanding of things. And with that, I will turn it over to Rav Chaim. Be well, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. See you next week for part 10.
Shakoch.